And so what I try to do is I try to get the federal governments, both here in the States and Australia, to understand that if you just say what your outcomes that you want achieved and just get out of the way and let the private sector take care of it, you're going to get a better result, and you actually, ironically, are going to save more dollars. And so that was what I was hoping that was coming out of the panels that I moderated, because there was that theme, right, of unlocking innovation, being efficient, but also at the same time, who's doing what in this space, and how can we, very importantly, foster even greater collaboration. Anything that we want technologically can happen. It's just, do we have the right business and mission process in place to optimize that innovation being unlocked? And so that's what I'm really focused in
on. Sean, tell me about yourself.
Well, Sean Singleton, originally from Savannah, Georgia. Had the opportunity of going to the United States Air Force Academy class in 1994. Didn't think I was going to get into the Air Force Academy, so I didn't take the whole process seriously, but I did. And, I toyed with the idea of possibly crossing over to another school after my freshman year, because your freshman year is by far the worst at any one of the service academies. But I figured that if I could get through that first year, I could get through the rest. And plus also, too, whenever you talk with a service academy graduate, we always talk about the people that left before graduation. And if you go to a civilian school, they talk about it as, oh, well, Mark transferred to University of Texas at Austin. Mark transferred University of Chicago. If you leave a service academy before graduation, you quit. And I never wanted to have the distinction of being a quitter. So I stayed and got through those 4 years and ended up, God's grace, going into the F-22 program office right before that program became operational.
Wow.
And so during that time, I had the opportunity of working for general officers, going back and forth between Ohio and Washington, D.C., getting to sort of understand the way the political ground game was played for a major weapon system. Did that for
It's very much a ground game.
It is very much a ground
It
game,
is.
and people that get it wrong end up finding themselves either in jail, fired, or actually,
Yes.
in the news, right? So,
True.
but you really need to understand it's very Game of Thrones, and so you have to
Yes.
understand all of that, right? How do you
Yes.
play those folks in the forces of Westeros? So, did that for a number of years, and I wanted to get to Washington D.C. ever since I was a 5-year-old kid.
Was your dad or family in the military? Nothing?
My dad grew up watching the Army-Navy football game, and thought it would be a great idea for his son to go to a service academy.
That's cool.
So he randomly looked through the Pentagon phone book and found the one colonel that was responsible for admissions, and unbeknownst to me, started this process of me going to the Air Force Academy. And so I would get things in the mail, and I was like, yeah, this is not going to happen. And then when I finally did, I was like, well, I'm going to go ahead and take that honor. And so the rest is history. So I did the Air Force for active duty for a number of years, crossed over into the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, and did counterintelligence activities, which is the same skill set that you need for federal sales.
Yes. Were you asked to go into that, or you kind of somehow aligned? Like, I'm curious to that leap.
So ever since
You don't need to go into too many details if that's a
No.
process. But I'm curious to I want more. I want a bigger challenge. Like, what did you see in that opportunity?
Well, so ever since I was 5 years old, I wanted to be in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And so my dad brought me to the White House in 1977.
Wow.
And so I walked up to, this is when you could drive up and down Pennsylvania
Right.
Avenue.
Right.
So I walked up to the Secret Service guy, uniform guy at the gate, and I said, sir, my name is Sean Singleton. I'm from Savannah, Georgia, and I'm here to talk with President Carter. And the guy looked at me and chuckled and was like, well, President Carter's having lunch right now. And I said, well, I'm not satisfied with the country right now, and I want to talk with the president and sort of give him some ideas of how to make things better. He's like, well, the president is busy, and so you're going to have to come back. And I was like, well, I can wait for him after lunch. The guy was like, well, he's going to go to Camp David after lunch. Can you please, just come back later and whatever? And I'm like, well, let me leave my number with you. It's 912-925-3688. Please have him give me a call. For 3 years, he never called. And guess what happened in November of 1980? He wasn't reelected. So you should always listen to the people that can give you some advice, right? So anyway, I had been
Had he only
listened to the 5-year-old, he would have been, yeah.
The world would be so much
It would have been a second Carter administration. Who knows, right? So, no, I had fallen in love with DC ever since then. So when I had this career broadening assignment to leave the F-22 to go to the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, I jumped at it.
Ah, okay.
And then the person for whom I worked, Francis X. Taylor, Brigadier General, said, I'm going to make you one of my reserve special agents before you separate from active duty. I did that, fell in love with the career because it's actually a sales job, right? You're interviewing folks, you're having conversations, you're asking open-ended questions,
Right.
and you're actively listening. So I did that for a number of years, in parallel also selling systems back into the federal government as what I call a Parkway Patriot versus a Beltway Bandit.
That's true.
And how
I'm great. I'm glad this is being recorded because these are great one-liners. I love them.
No, and I had a great time selling services
Right.
back into the federal government.
Right.
So I did that for 6 years, ended up going and getting my MBA, thinking that I was going to come back to help the federal government operate more efficiently.
Right.
But everyone I was surrounded by at business school was recruiting for investment banking or sales and trading. So I got into that career field. I had little exposure to financial services. I'd seen the movie Pretty Woman, but that was pretty much the extent of my understanding of high finance.
Sure.
So I ended up working for JP Morgan for 5 years in the investment bank and then also in the asset management space, and eventually made my way to San Francisco to be with my now wife working for JP Morgan. And then there is where it really gets interesting, because that was right when Secretary Carter started to create this dual-use innovation ecosystem that was centered around the Defense Innovation Unit.
Right.
And I came in as a part of the second wave under Raj Shah, and I ran the private equity venture capital arm of DIU, and actually helped build some of the strong relationships that the organization still endures today.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. Number one, because when you talk about the defense innovation ecosystem, everybody thinks, oh, we just need to buy better, right? Buy better, or buy a specific set of these things that we only need.
Yeah.
But there's a whole continuum that you have to think, almost like a farmer, right? I have to look at the soil. It is the soil there, and then watering all the way to get to the fine 5-star Michelin restaurant meal.
Do I have the right Caterpillar tractors? Do I have the right John Deere equipment? Do I have the right fertilizer that has the right proportions? Did I rotate from soybeans to corn? All of these different types of things. And it needs to be a well thought out process. And that's where I think that we're not getting it necessarily right. I think we understand a lot of things in this ecosystem, but I think that there's very few folks that know how to see how it all comes together. And that's what I'm working towards, is to try to get some level of symbiosis that exists across what I call the 5 essential communities of Department of Defense Innovation. So,
what are those 5 communities?
So I call it the Value Pentagon. And it all starts with the folks that own the priority problems, and that's the men and women in uniform, right? And so those are the people that generate the priority problems, right? And if you look at the DIU process, that's where it starts, is there. Then you have what I call the limited partners that fund all of this, and those are the folks on Capitol Hill.
That's right.
So the authorizers and the appropriators, because if they're not happy, they can cut your budgets and actually eliminate your program. So you want to make sure that you actually satisfy them.
Right.
The third constituency are the private equity and the venture capital firms, because those are the people that are responsible for doing the technical due diligence on corporations, and more importantly, understanding if they can actually make a business around the technology.
Absolutely.
It's a big difference between having a great technology and actually having a great business that's being driven by technology. And I think that's where DoD doesn't necessarily understand that, right? Intellectual property and PhDs do not equate to a great running business. So we can get more into that a little bit later, but that's the third constituency group. The fourth, as a natural byproduct, are the portfolio companies. Because those portfolio companies oftentimes are driven by serial entrepreneurs that have been there, done that know how to actually solve clients' priority problems and do that product market fit of a solution that actually meets their needs.
Right.
And then the fifth piece, and this is the one that I think largely gets shunned by folks that are coming from the non-traditional space, and folks on Capitol Hill, take them with a grain of salt, but also realize that they sort of, butter the bread, are the systems integrators.
Right.
The systems integrators, even though their heyday is probably not what it was today versus what it was, say, back in the 70s and the 80s, still fill a very important role, because they know exactly what the customer wants. They may not necessarily provide it to them in the most efficient ways, but they're actually mirroring their organizations to what the government is giving them.
Absolutely.
Yet these scaling partners, as I call them, can be great collaboration partners for their venture-backed startups, and also great amplifiers of the returns for the venture and the private equity investors, if they can actually get it all in a symbiotic balance. So if you get all 5 of those to understand each other's perspective, you unlock a tremendous amount of innovation. Case studies of success that actually equate to that are Shield AI, right, a defense unicorn. Anduril is a defense unicorn, right? Palantir is a defense unicorn. All of those entities had to hit all 5 of those things in order for them to equate to the success that they have. And that's what I'm trying to do, is to replicate that for a greater number of folks.
Sean, I love that, right? I love that you know that, number one. I love that you identified those three as good case studies. But in my mind, those are also outliers, right? And I think people need to understand what are the inherent qualities, or what are the five gates that they 100%, they need to know that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that those others can't replicate that, but they also have to individualize that to them. Right? It's that standard DAU answer. Well, it depends, right? I want to be like Palantir. I want to be like Shield AI. I want to be like Angel. Yes, that was a great system that demonstrated these five things. And you have five. I just say three. You have to be able to influence the strategic, operational, tactical level simultaneously.
Completely agree.
100%, right?
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that you even have it further than that. But for the communities that of a young startup coming in, it's difficult. Those are good aspirational models to follow and replicate, but they also need to know guys like Sean to be able to read through the case studies, beyond the case studies. These are the things that are going in, and that's not as prevalent.
It's quite true
out there in the ecosystem at large.
Yeah, and I'm glad that we're having this conversation, because what you all do at Q Branch, I think, is a great amplification of what I just articulated, right? I will say the Department of Defense buys the best technologies, comma, it can get on contract. If you can't get on contract, well, then it's all for naught. And the Palantirs, the Angels, the SpaceXs, and the Shield AIs have all figured it out. But in the case of SpaceX and Palantir, they had to sue the federal government in order to actually gain access to the ecosystem, right? That's not the most efficient way of actually burning calories, right? So what is really necessary is to get the DoD to understand, to focus in on outcomes versus requirements, and sort of letting all of the things sort of play themselves out to actually solve those problems. The startups that figure that out and are able to sort of articulate that value proposition to the government are the ones that will figure it out.
100%.
And the thing that the startups need to realize is that they don't necessarily need to do it all on their own, right? Who's the greatest running back in the NFL, or one of the greatest?
Oh my goodness.
Oklahoma State graduate.
Well, I was going to say Emmitt Smith, but I'm a Cowboys fan. What's his name? Tell me.
It would be Barry Sanders.
Barry Sanders.
How many Super Bowls did Barry Sanders win?
None. That's right.
He was still the greatest running back in the NFL at the time,
right.
but he had a horrible offensive line and had a horrible, defense, right? And they could never win a Super Bowl. You can be a Barry Sanders as a startup, but unless you have the offensive line and a
100%.
defense that actually supports you, you're not going to win Super Bowls.
Absolutely.
Startups need to have their offensive lines, strong defenses, in order for them to be the Barry Sanders to actually win the Super Bowl. And that's what I'm trying to do, is exactly that.
And I think what we have found, what I have seen, right? My dad was in this business. I joined the family business at large, is that a lot of these defense primes will look at that skill set in high demand and almost absorb that. And so guys that have that level of understanding, that have been in the system, exited the system, naturally aren't as accessible in the system.
Quite true.
And that's difficult. And so I love the DIUs, the Army Applications Office, and the AFWorks, because there wasn't as prevalent a front door to be able to get into these ecosystems. And again, these are just front doors to that large enterprise.
Spot on.
This is not the door to that marketplace that you're really looking at, the industry-specific things, meaning medical, right? Those are kind of almost compartmentalized across the United States at large. And that's really, if you're in one singular city, you're going to have to travel.
Oh, yeah.
You're talking about introducing it is a product, but they need to think of it as a capability.
Spot on.
Into the larger enterprise, and that's part of the commitment.
Spot on.
You have to be committed to this and really gauge, I think, the opportunity with the dollars that you have, and then partnerships in the team. So you're 100%. If you want to win the Super Bowl, you have to get down to the meal plan.
No question.
Right? You have to get down to the training plan, and you have to be able to get the playbook and then know the coaches. And just you got to keep that train of thought to football. But that's great. I tell folks every day, just because you can throw a football, you're not going to go play against the Cowboys tomorrow.
Oh yeah.
But that's what you're kind of saying.
Yeah.
You need to be able to do.
You need to be able to have that muscle memory and the activity at the same time, put it in the context of the much larger ecosystem, and actually, how do you go ahead and get those forces to be more under your influence, right? Because you can't control everything.
So, Sean, I've known you from afar for a very long time. I've followed you, and meeting you is even a bigger reward for me. But you've been very successful from afar from me meeting you. And we met through the Army, where the Army, I had approached them to really level up this game, which means, yes, we can look at the United States and the forces, but we don't fight by ourselves. It is a global environment.
Spot on.
And so how we met was we here at Q Branch did the Global Security Information Exchange, and you moderated 3 or 4 great panels.
Oh, thank you.
But because, again, these practitioners of the domestic need to understand the globalization. Tell me what you're working on in the global environment.
I appreciate the question. I appreciate the opportunity to working with you all during South by Southwest. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
And the perspective that I was bringing there, and I'm also bringing here this time to Fed Supernova, is one of an Australian AUKUS U.S. relationship, right? If we just relegate ourselves to just the Indo-PACOM theater, even though we have such a sizable presence there, we can't be everything to everyone, as was proven by World War II, right? We need to actually have collaboration partners in theater that actually work with us. And so I'm also the U.S. venture partner for Beaton Zone Ventures, which is headquartered out of Brisbane and Queensland, Australia. And we're bringing sovereign capability out of Australia into the United States. The point of why I bring that up is that if it works in Australia, it should work in the U.S. and vice versa. And we should reduce those barriers between the two. And I'm really myopically focused in on that, because if things do in fact go down in the Indo-PACOM theater, all of these bureaucratic headaches and heartaches that we're putting in place go to the wayside, right? There's no GAO report on whether or not we actually sustained the protest, right? All protests go out of the window once things go kinetic. And so I'm trying to get us to get to that type of a battle rhythm and sort of like a mental picture as far as what are the things that we need to do to satisfy the folks on Capitol Hill to make sure that we're getting the priority problem solved that the DoD needs, yet at the same time in the most efficient and expedient way possible. And that's where I come back to the private capital markets and the public capital markets as being that great accelerant for that. And so what I try to do is I try to get the federal governments both here in the States and Australia to understand that if you just say what your outcomes that you want achieved and just get out of the way and let the private sector take care of it, you're going to get a better result, and you actually, ironically, are going to save more dollars. And so that was what I was hoping that was coming out of the panels that I moderated, because there was that theme, right, of unlocking innovation, being efficient, but also at the same time, who's doing what in this space, and how can we, very importantly, foster even greater collaboration. Anything that we want technologically can happen. It's just, do we have the right business and mission process in place to optimize that innovation being unlocked? And so that's what I'm really focused in on.
Yeah,
So,
and again, there's similarities in need, right? From one area in Australia to here in the United States. And you're right, efficiencies will be gained once you just set the demand signal. But the demand is coming from the government, right? And the government has this nice cyclical way of going up and down. There's some consistency, but of knowing those patterns. But sometimes the private markets don't align with that. I mean, you see it that way. Have you noticed anything different when you talk about Australia's government to the United States government and how they do defense?
yeah. So just to give some context, right? So what are we, 340 plus million folks here, and there are about 28.5 million people in Australia, largely concentrated on both the East and the West Coast, right?
That's right.
It's just different when you start to go from 28.5 million to 340 million, right? And with the legacy that we have, because we have a 150-year head start on them as far as a nation.
That's right. That's right.
When you couple those two big things, it's just operating at a different scale and pace than what the Australians are used to, right? I work with a number of Australian startups, and the tendency is to try to bootstrap things and to sort of like try to keep your eggs close as opposed to exposing it too quickly and then going off and getting the maximum amount of impact and investment that you need. And what I'm trying to work with them on is to understand the way that things operate here in the States with regards to the ability to scale as quickly as you possibly can, realize revenue as quickly as you possibly can, because that's the way you actually survive and actually last till the next day, right?
Absolutely.
It's not necessarily bootstrapping. But with regards to the government, the Australian government, for whatever reason, doesn't trust themselves with regards to investing in their own Australian capability. So a lot of the Australian companies have to go to the States first, prove it out,
Right.
and then come back with that underwriter's laboratory seal of approval on their slide deck to then come back into
Wow.
the Australian government, right? I'm trying to change that to say have greater faith and confidence in your domestically sourced capability because it is world class in many instances, right?
Right. Oh, I know it to be that. Right. We ran a Western Australia accelerator, and just to see these you said world class items coming in. Yeah, I've seen it firsthand. To your point.
And so that's an inefficiency that the Australian government has. An efficiency that they have is that given the fact that there are 28.5 million people clustered on the coast, there's a lot of real estate that blow things up in the middle, right? And so from a range testing perspective, from a southern launch perspective, actually going out over the South Pole and in the Southern Hemisphere, there are a lot of assets that I think the federal government of Australia realize that they have. And they're doing a great job through Ambassador Rudd and Prime Minister Albanese, and then also too the Liberal Party, which is the conservative side over there. They also recognize it, and they're trying to export that capability to other places around the world, across the Five Eyes and other friendly nations. So there's that in Australia in a nutshell. The U.S. federal government, I think Secretary Carter did a phenomenal thing in 2014, 2015 by creating the Defense Innovation Unit, the Defense Innovation Board, and the like. The problem with the DoD in the States is that we have all of these Avengers doing their own things with their own
Yes.
special superpowers.
Yes.
I don't think that they realize that they're Avengers, and the whole will be greater than the sum of the parts. And that's where, again, I'm trying to get them to sort of understand that DIU, you have these capabilities, AFWorks, you have these capabilities, AAL, AFC, you have these capabilities. There is a mission and business process that needs to be sort of developed to bring all of you together in order to go ahead and give that clear demand signal to the private sector as far as what you want. The greatest thing that we have here in the States is we have the world's largest capital markets, both public and private. The capital markets can make great strategic and national security outcomes happen if they know what a clear demand signal happens to be,
Absolutely.
right? The reason why you have these defense unicorns, the reason why Palantir is the hottest stock for the last 18 months is because Alex Karp and the team have been able to tap into the demand signal, be able to actually get the DoD and the IC to really stay acutely focused on that, execute against that, and then, oh, by the way, then segue into the commercial market space, right? It's always been the commercial markets that Palantir has wanted to seek, with the DoD and the intelligence community being the proof point. The last thing I will say to you is this, is that when I was at DIU, we were doing some work with this really awesome company, Shield AI. We met Shield AI in January of 2016.
They have a great story too. So I know
Okay.
Brandon
And Ryan.
Ryan.
Yeah, they're brothers.
Right.
Ryan was there talking about the company. They ended up working with DIU 1.0, and actually it transcended all of the 2.0 when I was there, right? They did great work. I get a phone call from this guy who's the managing general partner at Andreessen Horowitz at the time and says, hey, what do you think about Shield AI? I was like, well, I'm a government executive. I can't advocate on behalf of the company, but they're dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and we see a great future in front of them as it relates to what we're responsible for in DoD, trying to put as many caveats on that. 2 weeks later, Andreessen led their 10.5 Series A, and the rest is history, right? When I had that conversation with this individual, what he candidly told to me is that the reason why they invested in SHIELD wasn't because of just the DoD and the intelligence community capability. It was because there were adjacent markets of metals and mining, oil and gas, commercial real estate that their capability could then be transitioned into from the DoD and the IC into the commercial space. My point is that investors get it. If they can actually see that transition path or the island hopping strategy, if you want to call it that, into much larger dollars, they will get behind these companies. It's just up to the Department of Defense and the IC to sort of like lay out those breadcrumbs and allow people to sort of pick them up.
I think back in, at least when I was in, we were starting to see the pendulum switch, where a lot of the research and development was really leveraged from the U.S. federal government, and then really led an opportunity to create some industry standards where the commercial just took off.
Yeah.
And now the Pentagon, the larger defense ecosystem is really following the commercial industry. And the commercial industry, in some regards, right, there's certain domains that only the government can, let's just say lethality. Lethality isn't going to be as prevalent in the in the city police forces, but I think that is a great example of really looking at what everybody does extremely well, focus in on that, but work collaboratively together to make sure that you follow that trace line of opportunity, like you just said.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, but I don't know if the smaller VC community kind of thinks or understands in that long journey. Have you noticed that to be the case?
It depends on the VC. Are you
Right.
talking like specific firms? Or are they getting
I mean,
are they understanding the process?
Yes.
I would say, and I'll give attribution to like the ones that I think are sort of best in class in this space. So I think the world of Matthew Biggie over at Crosslink Capital, right? I think he's one of the best dual use investors, right? He's a founding father of the space. I give props to Raj Shaw and the team over at Shield Capital. Raj being the head of DIU, he sort of understood
Right.
how all this comes together, and him hiring David Rothside from the Pathways Air Force Acquisitions team of the thing.
That helps.
Knowing how to get your portfolio companies
Absolutely.
on contract and understanding that long maturation cycle. I think Andreessen, I think Inian, I think some of these others, Vinrock, are definitely folks that are getting very aggressive in this space and getting that understanding and that level of granularity that's necessary. And I think the more that their portfolio companies have liquidity events, then that's going to drive even more capital that wants to
Absolutely.
understand that. And then it's going to actually drive more business to the Q branches and others out there because you have the ability to sort of help be that Rosetta Stone between the public and the private sectors, sort of do that translation, if you would, of like what each and every one of them wants.
Right.
But to get them on the same sheet of music to understand when you say it this way, government, this is how it's received by Wall Street. When you say it this way, Wall Street, this is the way it's received by the venture capital community, right? And so being able to translate across all three of those domains, I think is really important and really key.
And those translators aren't as prevalent.
And that's where I think that the system can actually greatly benefit by having more of those folks. And again, those folks happen when you have more case studies of success and even
right.
case studies of failure, right?
That's right.
And so I think we're about 5-10 years away from us getting where close to what I call the zenith of this space. But if we don't get to that zenith, it's going to be because we have people that keep talking past each other. And that's what I'm trying to be proactive to get away from.
And we have events, these micro and macro type of events where the conversation needs to continue.
Absolutely.
It needs to continue. I've heard some smart startups come into certain events and say, I didn't, nothing tangible came out of that. Meaning I didn't get a check. I didn't get somebody to buy from me in that way. The buyers weren't there. All I heard was this conversation about the ecosystem at large. I said, that's knowledge. I mean, you need to be able to hear from the practitioners that are in this space, even some of the problems that they're having, because it's not at large an easy button.
No question about it.
Right. And even in those forums where you may not have achieved a potential outcome that you were looking for immediately, you have learned. You've learned about the transition of your widget to talk to about a capability. And so that level of insight. So it's a learning event, period. It's a networking event, period. To achieve that outcome in a room without you setting some conditions prior to the fact, I would say that's a missed opportunity.
I completely agree with everything you just wonderfully articulated. So, building off of that, and this is what I say to both the Australian and the US companies with whom I work and have an equity stake, treat your product sale as if you were McKinsey. And what I mean by that, it's a consultative sale.
That's right. It is.
It's always a consultative sale. You actually need to understand what your client's problem is first before you can start pitching widget. And unfortunately, a lot of product vendors view it as a numbers game, a strict numbers game. I need to talk to 1,000 people in order to sell 30 widgets. That might work, but it's a very, very, I think, war of attrition kind of a way of actually trying to do sales. The way more efficient way is to actually do all of that intellectual rigor that you need. Go to the various things at Q Branch, go to the various things at other places, gather that insight and that knowledge, and then formulate a sales plan on top of that as how I'm going to leverage that knowledge to go off and take advantage of that by solving priority problems. And be comfortable with the fact that my widget might not necessarily be the thing for you. However, I do know somebody over here that's a collaboration partner that might be able to sort of help you in that regard. And so you engender trust with that government customer. And then when there's something that's ripe for you and your company, then they come back to you because you become that trusted advisor. So thinking that long game is what's really important for a lot of companies. And unfortunately, they don't necessarily have either that perspective or that time horizon. It's up to us to educate them. If you're going to go down this path, these are the things that you need to realize and understand. The boundary conditions, they might change slightly,
Right.
but by and large, understand these are sort of the rules of Westeros, for lack of a better term.
And I love that you come from the private capital markets too, because at the end of the day, it's business. 100% business. And you need to have, I'm not tooting my horn for Q Branch, but you need to have people like you and I to really, to get to the it depends, to look at that one singular scenario, that company, and look at, all right, where are you at right now? Let me diagnose you in a way. Are you prepared? And where are some of the weaknesses, strengths, opportunities? Because you have to keep your eye on the budget. You have to keep your eye on revenue. All of those business-oriented tasks, that's what you really need to be able to see. Are you ready to get into that game? And going down that singular path to win the Super Bowl, okay, yes, that's maybe an end state. How you get to the Super Bowl is a different way, meaning your product, you want to sell to Sean, let's say Colonel Sean, right? I want to sell this to him, but that's going to take a long time. What are other pathways that you have seen in order to maintain the bottom line, to stay in the game, right? Revenue is keeping you in the game in order to still achieve that outcome. Have you seen some best practices?
Oh, absolutely. And so I applaud you and what you and the team are doing with regards to the cohorts that you're bringing into the Q Branch frame of reference. And what my sincerest hope is 20, 30, 40 years from now, there is this really awesome corpus that you've developed of great companies that have had multi-billion-dollar exits because they've gone through your process.
I hope so. I mean, it's a team effort. It's our process.
Well, thank you for letting me be the Ringo to your Beatles. But, I would love to sort of see that proliferate a little bit more. I come back to the fifth piece of the value pentagon, which are the systems integrators, right? Like it or not, they're not going to go away. So I had a conversation with Chris Moran, who I deeply respect, who's the head of Lockheed Ventures. Have you met Chris?
I haven't. No.
He's a good person for you to know, especially for your portfolio companies that are really trying to do things that, affect kinetics and space, right? Because Lockheed is everywhere, right? So here during South by Southwest, I had a conversation with him, and I said, hey, Chris, how large is Lockheed's government relations team? Meaning the team that covers Capitol Hill and the executive branch and, international investor relations with governments, right? He thought for a moment. He said about 425. They almost have one person for every member in the House of Representatives. That's a part of their government relations team, right? Most startups will never get to 425 people, right? So if you're dealing with an organization that has a phalanx of government, reps, right? That's 425. How do you cooperate and graduate with them? And one of the best things to do is with a Lockheed Martin or Raytheon, you choose the corporation. If you're having a great conversation with Colonel Happelblap and he says, I would love to buy whatever you're selling, but I don't have a mechanism, take that to Lockheed Martin. Take that to Booz Allen and Hamilton. Take that to Raytheon, Leidos, SAIC, the list goes on, and say, you have a toehold with this customer. This customer wants to buy X from me. I need you as a scaling partner to use, in the case of Booz Allen and Hamilton, their Morpheus contract vehicle, or Sentinel in the case of Leidos. Can you please put a task order on this indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contract? We both succeed, and that gives me the flight heritage, for lack of a better term, to sell even greater sources and capability into the government. And the investors love that because it's a known publicly traded entity that's helping them realize what is truly annual recurring revenue, as opposed to, these small business innovation research grants, which are nice, but you can't book those as annual recurring revenue. So that's where you're able to bring all of these forces together, right? And then I can't stress enough the importance of DIU in this space. It's the only one of the DoD innovation organizations that can incur a commitment on behalf of the federal government to actually helping a company scale if they're successful in their pilot prototype, right? If that pilot prototype goes well, DoD through DIU will say you have a production contract. It's already been competed because the competition happened in the pilot prototype phase, and that allows you to go ahead and scale it up. That's the reason why Shield AI and some of these others are becoming unicorns, because they got DIU production contracts.
Right. There's a lot to unpack in what you just said. And I love that I can talk to somebody that kind of gets that as well. Partnerships are key, right? Partnerships are key. And, even when I was in the special ops community, we were going global. They were my partners, those systems integrators, and which is somewhat counterintuitive, what you're reading, and just the bias that goes against the primes, and they're going to absorb, and they're just not going to give anybody a fight. Well, they have that connective tissue. They know that customer. They also know the process from which to interact with that customer. That's years and years and years of knowledge. You getting into the game, you don't understand that. So a lot of times what I tell some of these young startups is partner with them and learn.
Spot on.
They are your mentors.
Spot on.
They are your mentors, right? They are the best way for you to understand the community at large, to make good, informed business decisions. Be confident in your capabilities and what you've designed, right? Protect that. Have good kind of conversations with them, but don't not have the conversation with them.
Yeah.
Right? Continue to mature and understand they're there. And guess what? Your platform or your product is integrating with likely their system or a combination of all the above, because we are a combined arms organization. Right? And so the Air Force needs to talk to the Army.
No question about
By
it.
which way is this going to happen? So again, who better knows that is those primes and integrators that have been in that environment.
And to bring the capital markets perspective back in, it's a try before you buy. If you are a startup in this space, there's a finite number of you that are going to get to the multi-billion-dollar status, right? Like, say, an Anduril. There's nothing wrong with being acquired by a prime for a couple $1 billion, right? But the way that they're going to actually get comfortable with you is de-risking through a collaboration over time.
Absolutely.
There's nothing wrong with selling.
I think
your
that's
company
anything,
for,
right? It's like dating. I mean, it's a natural human
exactly
interaction, right? Building
Yet we
trust.
have these perceptions of what a prime is, not recognizing that a prime is a manifestation of the government itself, right?
Oh yeah, thank you for.
Yeah, so that's the thing.
I'm having another conversation with a fisherman. I love this. You're absolutely right. We, as the U.S. federal government, have put these boundaries in order for them to be successful, right? So we kind of grew that environment.
Spot on.
And if we want to change or adapt, we kind of need to go to not look at the symptoms, but what is the cause?
Spot on.
Right?
Spot on.
What are some of the causes, and be able to influence, yes, the symptoms, but the cause itself. And that's even longer sometimes.
That is, and so prime example on that specific thing is that one of the things we looked at DIU was the amount of share buybacks that the primes did versus the amount of R&D spend that they did. And at the time, they were doing more share buybacks than they were spending for R&D, and everybody was lambasting them about, why aren't you investing more in R&D? There's really no incentive for them to do that because they have a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders to maximize shareholder value. And if their fiduciary responsibility is achieved by buying back shares versus investing in R&D with a nebulous result, they're actually violating the corporate trust that they have with their shareholders. The department needs to incentivize them by saying that we will reward you for this research and development by doing something with it. They have to figure out what that is, but we will do something with it, and we're going to give you the tax credits, everything that you need to actually help you with that. Give a context to this. Last fiscal year, FY24, Amazon alone spent $88.5 billion in their own internal research and development. The government didn't say, hey, Amazon, do this. They just did it because it was automatically a straight line, 15% of sales, right? That's pretty much standard when you actually look at it from a tech perspective. 15% of sales goes back into R&D to keep the flywheel going. In context, the top 6 systems integrators, I won't name them here, spent guess how much in comparison?
I don't know, 0.
$11.5 billion.
11. Wow.
Amazon alone spent 8 times more than the top 6 primes, right? So the question then becomes is how do you, DoD and IC, incentivize the Amazons, the Microsofts, the Meta / Facebooks, the Apples to take on more of your priority problems, considering that they're putting out orders of magnitude greater in R&D spend for things that you should probably care about. If 90+% of what DoD needs is coming from the commercial sector, and these are their major drivers of growth as far as R&D, we need to figure out a better way of incentivizing them to solve the priority problems of the men and women.
Does that affect the research environments that we have already there within the federal government?
With like the labs and
the labs, right? To me, that would be the first thing that I would think of is in influencing this. What are the effects on our own current research? But ultimately, here's the other thing too: is so you have research, you still have to transition it.
Spot on. Spot on.
right? And so universities are sitting on stacks and stacks of phenomenal research, but it comes down to the humanistic characters and taking that and doing something with it.
Can you build a business around
Can
it?
you build? It's simple supply and demand.
I think where we have gotten in the way of equilibrium, so to answer the root of your first part of the question, I think there's a role for the labs. I still think that there's a reticence on behalf of the federal government to understand that the federal government is no longer in the driver's seat as far as innovation goes, right? You can make an argument that the labs and that infrastructure is a vestige of a time that's long since passed. With that being said, the equilibrium that we've gotten into is that basic research is effectively done at the government's level by the labs, both the DOE and the Department of Defense labs, and also by the universities. I think where we need to get better is what are the on ramps and
Yes.
off ramps for capabilities,
Right.
right? When you deal with the technology transfer offices at a Department of Energy lab or Department of Defense lab, it's hit or miss depending on the location, right? Some technology transfer offices are better than others. If we can establish a common baseline and an understanding of what the true mission happens to be, is to channel as much intellectual property out of these labs into the commercial sector to sort of feed that beast. I think that's a great way for us to sort of build a new business process for the 21st century.
Okay, building something new comes with an understanding of everyone's needs, right, or the needs at large. Is there, or have you seen a common operating environment or common operating picture that articulates those demands from the government?
No. The way you get to that, though.
Well, and I understand.
okay.
And I just let me caveat this. I should have said this earlier. We also don't want to list out our needs
And be prescriptive.
and be that prescriptive. Yeah, that's also the other thing, right? We don't want to say, "Hey, I want a red Corvette with this size cup holder," because it could have been easily solved with an algorithm, right? So, but again, where does the industry go for those signals? Right? Oh, you need to go to that website. You need to go to this website. You need to read this landing page and then get to the comment. I have not seen that anywhere. Have you, or where do you source that understanding?
Well, this gets back into, having to be the boots on the ground, to go to a conversation at Q Branch, to go to a conversation at you choose the venue, right? To be a part of a JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs conference and synthesize all of that information, because there is no one font of knowledge, right? At this stage, we are at an infancy point, right? The only way we're going to get to a maturation to where you have sort of the easy button as far as where you get the government demand enumerated is by having more case studies of success, right?
Where do those case studies hang? I love that. Yes. Like, where is that forum where we talk about these things? Maybe.
Well, that's.
Yeah, I was just going to say. Right when I was asking, I was like, there we go, Sean.
Yep.
That's good.
That's what needs to happen.
It really does. It does.
What we've talked about in these last few minutes, we need to be able to do this at scale and to create those case studies of success, right? A lot of inner city kids in America know that one ticket to wealth is through sports, right? Same thing when you actually go down to Brazil. The fastest way to actually get international fame is to actually be a great soccer player, right? There's no government program that says, hey, if you do this, this, or this, or this, people just see the outcome and then they work backwards from there on their own, right? The more we have these case studies of success, people will do the math themselves to sort of figure out what I need to do on my own in order for me to achieve that outcome. And that's what needs to have happen through Q Branch and other mechanisms. Showcasing those case studies as they happen as quickly as you possibly can will sort of reinforce that ecosystem development by having folks connect the dots and finding even more efficiencies that may not even be contemplated right now, if that makes sense. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
We got to get the word out, number one. Number one. And then I think the knowledge will naturally, you put the information there, they will come. You build it, they will come in that way. And I think then everybody can kind of take the best practices, what we were talking about, and individualize them, right? And then the conversation needs to have a continuum. When I first came into this environment post-military, I was very motivated. We had access to data and information at our fingertips. Coming out in this environment, you're out of the world. You can't go back to that. So where do I find that information to find those case studies, see where the success is, but with real, almost near real-time data, right? So the only platform that I had seen was Deal Room. Deal room was something that we had a global understanding immediately. But that costs, those are enterprise level costs in order to be able to access that information. And so how does the small startup really look at the information to be successful? Right. I'm sure now ChatGPT can individualize that in a certain way.
It can help.
Right. It can help. But again, also those participants should be able to access and see those metrics of success. To see the Shield. I'm sure Shield did a lot of micro successes that others really just weren't aware of that would have even compounded faster.
No question.
That
question.
success, right? Because when, only the capital markets are going to look at certain things, but others should be able to go to a repository and see that, wow. I saw Deal Room as something like that, but it's still not for what we do in this dual use space.
I'm glad you brought up Deal Room, right? And so you have Bloomberg terminals, right? You have PushBook, you have Preqin, you have all of these different repositories of information.
Right.
One day, as this ecosystem grows, I do get a sense that there will be a data stream on either one of those platforms, or a new platform will come about because there's actually justification to invest in that.
Right.
There needs to be a very healthy ecosystem to justify the investment. Once that happens, there will be a repository of this type of knowledge, because a lot of these companies, even if they're working with classified customers, right, or doing sensitive things, there's still that capital market cycle that needs to be sort of fed with the information, right? And if you're going to go off and do your Series B to Series C raise, it would be nice to have as much information out there as possible,
right,
to give potential investors comfort in what you're doing.
Absolutely. And then also bring in the stakeholders that you didn't know could even make that faster.
Spot on.
Part of the conversations that we're talking about in the next forum, we're going to do these defense meetups here, but we want not it to be one person speaking. We want quite the opposite. We want everybody in the room to tell their success stories. If you're a startup and you could tell me, hey, I just got an Air Force contract with this community, oh my gosh. Again, to the partnerships, the integration. We don't necessarily have to have the primes doing the integration. The community can kind of help themselves.
And primes have an input to that,
100%.
but they're just one variable in a larger equation.
Absolutely. Sean, one of the things that I do in the podcast is I ask everybody, if you had a call sign, what would your call sign be? You're an Air Force guy. You probably have one already. But if not, you had to give yourself a call sign, which again is not how you normally. You don't get to self-select.
But I'm going to give top three choices. Squadron.
But I'm going to give you the opportunity. What is your call sign that you want everyone to be able to know? It really taps into your passion.
I know what I want to say. It's just not necessarily one that translates easily. So I'll just give you some context, right? So I had a chance on one of my long flights, because I'm always on the road, to my wife and daughter's chagrin. And I typically, if I have time, I'll watch the documentaries that they have on the various flights. So this really awesome documentary on Clarence Kelly Johnson, probably one of the greatest innovators this country has ever had, right? So if you don't know, he was the head of Skunk Works, right? Okay, no, I didn't. That's a great book, by the way. It's amazing, absolutely.
I really like that book.
The U-2, the SR-71, all of these great platforms, even the F-117, the stealth, fighter, were things that were directly tied to Clarence Kelly Johnson.
Wow.
Clarence Kelly Johnson hacked the bureaucracy and was able to get all of these platforms done into 18 to 36 months, right? From just back of napkin ideation all the way through to actual full-scale production, right? He ran into the buzzsaw that was Robert McNamara in the 1960s. So Robert McNamara, the same guy that was one of the larger reasons why Vietnam happened the way that it did, also brought in the whiz kids and really bogged down the Department of Defense until the system that we have today that really produces all of these inefficiencies. To get to your question as far as that, I would love to have some kind of call sign that would suggest that cutting through the bureaucracy would be a way of actually getting people to freedom. And so maybe Excalibur would be sort of
that was good.
A way of
like
actually,
that.
Being able to raise out of the lake to sort of lead people to a much better future. So
all right, Excalibur. I love it. Okay, the next question that I'm a voracious reader, and I always want to know what book that you love that kind of is a defining book for you, and then what you're reading now.
Oh, excellent. Thank you so much. Alexis de Tocqueville, Democracy in America, is one of the greatest reads that you could possibly have. I don't know, have you read it?
No, I haven't.
It's fascinating how a French.
This is a secret way for me to kind of build my wish
Okay,
list.
yeah,
So
I mean, it's really,
that's
yeah. And even it's still summer, so it can be on the summer reading list,
spoiler
right?
alert, I just need more books to read.
He comes to America in the 1830s, right? Sort of at the tail end of the Andrew Jackson administration, and he's able to synthesize the ethos of America after a 2-year trip in the 1830s in a book. And it's so prescient the way he actually calls out the eventual evolution of America to where what he said in 1830 largely has borne itself out almost 200 years later. So I would highly encourage you to read that. He calls out Canada, he calls out the US, he calls out Mexico, and the way that those three countries themselves have developed largely along the lines of the things that he sort of analyzed then. So I would recommend that for anybody.
Okay, all right.
The last book that I just read, and I'm getting ready to go and pivot into another one, is actually going to be about, it's Brett Baer. He wrote the one about the meeting at Yalta with Stalin, Churchill, and FDR. I'm going to read that after this. But the book called Range.
Range. Oh, I think it's in my wish list.
It is an awesome book. And it talks about, and the opening chapter is this. It compares Tiger Woods to Roger Federer.
Yes, I have read that book.
Okay.
Love that book.
Okay.
That is a great book. But please continue.
Well, so the thing that I love that he starts off that chapter is that he compares Tiger Woods, who ever since the age of 2 had been programmed to be a golf legend, right? Golf is a sport of repetition, right? If you can actually get a consistent swing, if you actually, yes, the situations change, but there's a lot of consistency in golf. Tennis is a sport where the variables change so quickly, each ball stroke, because you're actually dealing with someone else and what they're thinking, right? So it's chess played at a much faster pace. Right. Roger Federer didn't take up tennis until he was like in his early teens. But he played handball, soccer, and all of these other different things that increased his dexterity and his lateral movement to where he became the great Roger Federer after taking up tennis, right? The book's point, you can back me up on this, is how in the age of increased specialization, there's a need for more generalists out there. People that understand how to leverage the specialists in order to actually get things netted together, right? Getting back to this conversation, we need more generalists that understand how to leverage the specialists in the labs, in the primes, in the startups, in the venture ecosystem, and on Capitol Hill to actually sort of build out that value pentagon and actually get us to where we need to go as an ecosystem. So
I forgot about that book. I love that book. I really am, because that's, in a way, that's where I see myself as, like, I can identify the specialists. I'm not the smartest guy in the room, right? I have just enough understanding to be like, oh, where's Sean? He needs to be here for this, right? Or where is this marketing guru? And there's some trace line, but in the immediacy of of a return that you just got, you negated a potential ace.
Yeah, you need to bring it all together, and you are a master at that. And
I appreciate that.
You look at the greatest musical groups of all time, and they've been folks that have been able to synthesize all of these different things, like Ray Charles, Led Zeppelin, the Beatles. All great because they were able to bring all of these disparate things together into one cohesive.
And this is fun. This is a dynamic environment. Things are ever changing, and what I find is, even though there is change, you can fall upon knowledge points that sometimes are repeatable. And repeatability, consistency is part of the driver for success.
And that's how you build legacy.
We're going to build a legacy together, man. So I really appreciate you coming in today.
So
this is awesome. We're not, part of this podcast is me thinking, oh, I have to get you on more regularly. And we can potentially interview others, even though we're going to do a remote in that opportunity. So let's lean into this, man. I've had fun. in this
Same
podcast.
here. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
This is good. So is there any kind of a last minute shout out that you want to miss, that you may have missed in the conversation?
No, I just
want to
think,
put out there.
Well, I'd say broadly speaking, those are the folks that are actually on the front lines that are trying to actually affect change in the positive way of keeping us beyond parity of our near peers and peers. Keep doing what you're doing. At the same time, they'll recognize you don't have to do it all by yourself. Think like the Avengers. How can I go ahead and leverage the superpowers of others out there to actually be something that's much greater than myself?
Love that.